Twilly-dilly-dee, 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 tweet, 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 tweet.
She talks to the people all night long, chatting and a-gabbing and a-singing her song. All the divas down on Rainbow Street love to hear Toni go tweet, tweet, tweet. Talking Toni,
Tweet, tweet,
talking Toni.
tweet, twilly-dee,
Whoa, talking Toni, gonna talk tonight.
tweet, twilly-dee.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talking Toni. I'm Toni Holmperm, the singing diva of Long Island. And actually, I'm feeling a little super heroic today. My very, very, very special guest is none other than novelist and comic book writer and editor, Mr. Paul Kupperberg. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Toni. How are you?
I'm super today, Paul.
See that? Dress for success.
I know. Actually, Paul, someone told me that you have a thing for Kryptonian girls.
I do have a thing for Kryptonian girls. This is true. I have had long-term relationships with a couple of them.
Probably some one of your longest relationships has probably been with Kryptonian girls, correct?
It's sad but true. Yeah. Supergirl and Power Girl.
Both of them. Yes, I know. Well, Paul, a lot of people don't know, but I grew up like hooked on comic books. I was a huge comic book collector. I actually went to the Joe Kubert School of cartoon graphics. I sat in between Jim Keefe, who does Sally Forth, and Rags Morales, who has done
I love Rags.
Justice League, and he did X-Men and so many terrific comic books.
I love Rags. I know him. Yeah.
I know. So I actually, I sat right in. I was basically in between those two, and like none of their comic book drawing skills rubbed off on me. Not a single one. I don't know what happened, but I do look good as Supergirl. So that
There's compensations. Yes.
There is compensation. Yes. Now, Paul, as I was saying, you've been a writer and editor of comics, magazines, novels. We discussed a little bit before we started. Back in like the mid 70s and 80s, you probably had a hand in almost every DC character. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Supergirl, Power Girl, Phantom Stranger. You created.
I live on the Indy 500 here. It's I don't know.
What are you gonna do? You created Arion with Jan Duursema.
Yes.
Which was a
Kubert
comic
School
book
graduate.
Yes, another Kubert School graduate. I actually I remember when I was getting ready to go to Kubert School, like I showed her a lot of some of my drawings and asked her advice, and her and her husband Tom Mandrake, they were always so nice, such lovely people. But that was I tried to be a comic book artist, but it failed. You, however, have been extremely successful in the comic book industry. Everyone who knows anything about DC Comics, they know your name. It's without question.
Except the current people running DC Comics.
We don't care about them, Paul. We don't care about. Paul. They're not doing real comics.
Yes, but they're paying real money.
Oh, there is that. There is that. But so I told you a little bit about my love of comic books. Now, Paul, how did you develop your love of comic books?
It was almost inevitable in my case. I grew up in a household where I had my brother is a couple of years older, and he was reading comic books, and my uncle, who was only 10 years older than me, lived in the next building, and he had comic books. So everywhere I went, there were comic books, and the turning point was, however, a very tall man in a ringmaster's costume named Claude Kirshner, who had a TV show in New York City, a kids show that ran from 7 to 7:30 every evening. And I went to bed right after that. You know, it was around 59, 60 when I'm 4 and 5 years old. And one of the things he did was run the Fleischer Superman cartoons from the 1940s in black and white, because, you know, we had I think it was a 13-inch Philco TV, you know. You know, that character, just like, you know, and those, I don't know if you're familiar with the cartoons, but they're
I remember watching them. Yes.
Yeah, they're some of the best, you know, old school animation done, certainly in superhero cartoons. You know, then go around the corner of the candy store, and they're in the rack, and Flemy's is the same guy, but in blue and red and yellow. And, you know, I was hooked. I just discovered these things, and, you know, they caught my imagination. They also kind of served as a safe place for me for various and sundry reasons. And, you know, I just connected.
Yeah. Honestly, I can relate to that. Being as a young boy, and knowing that I was very, very different from most of the other boys that were around me, comics was like a great escape. I've said oftentimes that I sort of feel like doing drag for me is kind of like being like a superhero in a way. I put on, you know, a sort of a disguise, you know, in a costume. Exactly. Yeah.
The comic books taught me kind of that sometimes you have to be different people for different reasons. You know, I was living, you know, this life that had very unhappy moments in it, and but I also had the other parts where I was, you know, taking off the glasses and putting on the spit curl, and, you know, I could be myself, or I could be who I thought I might be. It was a very helpful thing.
Absolutely. And I believe one of the very first things that you did was a comic fanzine. Is that correct?
Yeah.
The comics reader, right?
Well, before that, when I was I was in middle school, what we called junior high school, in Brooklyn, I met this other kid in 9th grade. His name was Paul Levitz. And I had another friend who had met him, and we all kind of, you know, but we were like the only 3 kids in Meyer Levin Junior High School who read comic books, it seemed. And we got friendly, and then we started. Paul had already been getting fanzines and things like that. So, you know, we started making our own. We did a couple, you know, of Xerox type things. I used to do, you know, Ditto and Mimeograph. Well, not Mimeograph. I never got as lofty as Mimeograph. I did Ditto. So, you know, so a lot of fanzines. And then in 1971, the preeminent news fanzine was announced their retirement. And Paul and I thought, you know, at 15 years old, well, we can do that.
Of course.
You know, so we took that was Don and Maggie Thompson, who were, you know, just kind of the mom and pop of comics, of modern comics fandom.
Yes.
They've been doing their new zine, Beautiful Balloon. And so we, you know, scraped up a few bucks to get the thing printed, and, you know, take an ad out in a couple of other fanzines. And, you know, just luckily we sent a copy of the first issue to Don and Maggie, and Don gave it a very nice review. And, you know, it just kind of took off from there. And we did that for a couple of years, and until we graduated high school.
And from there, at some point, you you did actually break into the comics field as a comic book writer. So was that at Charlton? Was that your first?
Charlton Comics was the first
Mhm.
sale. Yeah, that was in April of 1975 when I got my acceptance.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was just I had started, writing up those very formulaic, horror monster stories of the time for the anthology comics, and sent them out. And fortunately, through the fanzines, I kind of had an extra in.
Right.
I mean, not that it was way more likely and easier in those days. You could actually go up to DC, knock on the door, and if they knew your face, you could kind of wander around the hallways and just hang out.
I'm sure that doesn't fly nowadays.
I mean, and earlier in the '60s, they used to give a tour every week, every Thursday at 3:30. I think it was. You'd go up and you could, get a tour of the offices, and as you'd walk out, they'd hand you a piece of original art as a parting gift. It was a very different world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Because nowadays original art, it's like it's like
I don't think it exists anymore hardly.
that's true. That's true. It seems like everything is done digitally.
Yeah, I had a kid argue with me once that lettering had never been done on the boards. Why would they do it on the boards? You do it with the computer. Yeah, in 1936, sure. But the amount of things fans don't know about how the business works that they think they know is astonishing.
Oh, I'm sure. But I'm sure that's true for like every business.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. It's like, I mean, you see it. You see it in movies and television, especially. All the fans is like, what you should do is, you have access to the same information I do. You're telling me what to do, But anyway, so it was a very different atmosphere. So, and of course, the fanzines helped. It also helped that one of my best friends, Paul Levitz, in 1973, had taken a temp job as Joe Orlando's assistant editor, summer fill-in job, and just never left, and publisher and president of the company.
That's right. Eventually, yeah, he was publisher and president. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and actually, one of my all-time favorite comic books was Legion of Superheroes, which Paul wrote for so many years, and it was like, as a little kid, I was like, I would make up imaginary stories that I was like a member of the Legion of Superheroes, and it was just he was I just loved Legion of Superheroes, and you like wrote some Legion stories as well.
I did a few. I did I did some fill-in stuff for Paul, stories here and there. But I also did the 3-issue miniseries Secret.
That's right.
Superheroes.
The Secrets. Wasn't that the one where it was revealed that R.J. Brand was really Chameleon Boy's father?
Or he was a Durlin. I don't remember. It was
yes.
Yeah.
See, I remember.
You remember more than I do. But the Legion has always been good. I mean, I loved it as a kid. Although my favorite strip, as a kid starting out, the reason I started collecting Action Comics, and again, I love Superman.
Oh yes.
Any character ever. The reason I started collecting Action Comics was for the Supergirl backup.
Go on, Paul. You flatter me.
I'm just telling the truth, darling.
Yes, I actually have to say, when you first started doing, and it was the Daring New Adventures of Supergirl when it started up until I think issue 14 when the movie came out. Then it just became Supergirl. But I loved your Daring New Adventures of Supergirl. I loved that comic book, and I also huge Supergirl fan. I don't know why she's had so many problems in the comic book world. I don't know why.
They certainly up until the time that people like Marty Pasco and myself started writing her,
Mhm.
they always insisted on treating her like a girl.
Mhm.
I kind of I don't know where I got the attitude, but I realized it long after the fact that in 1977 at 22 years old, when I created my first superhero group, the Doom Patrol, I
Yes.
created a group that was 50% female,
Mhm.
one of which was a woman of color,
Right. Yes.
and 50% male, one of whom was a man of color, and the other was
Yes.
a robot.
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's always
A
been,
woman of color was Celsius, correct?
yes,
And the man of color was Tempest, I believe, was
right.
his character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Paul.
Yeah. But it's always been, and I've even things I've written, books and young adult stuff I've written.
Yes,
A
yes.
couple of them, people have read them and come, the girl was the smartest one in the story. The side character, the girl, the friend over there,
Mm-hmm.
one who was usually saying, "Well, why don't you do that?" I guess there was there was several generations of strong women that I grew up around. My great grandmother lived until 1980 to be 102 years old.
Wow.
So she was a little old Jewish woman in Crown Heights. When I was born. So and then I had aunts and great aunts and all these old country people and and most of them were widows. I don't know what that says about the time or the women in my family, but a lot of tough women. So
Uh-huh.
I picked up something from that.
Yeah, you certainly did. I sort of got a little ahead of myself because I also wanted to know when you first started working at DC Comics, what was the environment like? I'm sure, like compared to today, it's just a
was
completely
a
different
candy
world. It was what?
It was a candy store.
A candy store. In what way?
I was the kid who got the keys to the kingdom, who got the keys to the candy store, who had permission to go in there and play with all these great characters, who could walk into the library containing bound volumes of everything DC had published and just take them down and sit there and read them.
Mm-hmm.
I could be in the company of Julie Schwartz and Murray Boltinoff and Bob Kanigher and Bob Haney and
legends.
Legends. I came into the business in 1975
Mm-hmm.
when the comic book industry was 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in it, for more than half its existence. But when I came in 75 and it was 40 years old, that meant the people who created the business were still in their 60s and 70s. They were still young and still around. And I say they were still young because I'm 65. So now, 60s, you kidding me? That's a kid. But,
those whippersnappers.
those punks, what do they know? But, I got to know these guys. I got to hang out and sit around while Tex Blaisdell was inking, something.
Tex was one of my teachers at Kubert School.
Who doesn't love Tex?
He was what a wonderful man he was.
Him and Bill Drought.
Mm-hmm.
And they would go to lunch together,
Mm-hmm.
and come back to the office, and that's when they were the most fun to talk to. There wasn't a lot of inking getting done after lunch.
I know what you're talking about.
But I love these guys. Bob Kanigher was this kind of he was nuts, but in the greatest way. He was a bore. He'd get in your face and he'd tell you these tall tales about himself, and it was just wonderful. It was just great because here's this guy whose stuff, some of the first comics I remember reading were his Wonder Woman from the late 50s, mm-hmm. when he had kind of devolved into this girl's fairy tale comic, with a lot of dragons and genies and
yes.
Yeah.
I remember those from reprints. Although I really loved those. There was like
they were great. They're kid stories for kids.
Yes. They were very whimsical, and even though nowadays comics are very everything is dark and very very serious, but there was something so special about those whimsical
Yeah.
fantasy type Wonder Woman stories, and also like the Lois Lane stories, the ones that like Kurt Schaffenberger drew, where Lois and Lana Lang were always fighting over trying to get Superman, and trying.
Or,
I mean,
she would turn super fat for
yes.
some reason, or
Or huge head that was
or-
bald.
yeah, Lois and Jimmy's, Jimmy Olsen comic too was like,
Yes.
giant turtle man,
Yes.
whatever. It was just, it was inspired lunacy, and nobody was expected to take it seriously because
Right.
all those Superman books back then were edited by Mort Weisinger, and he had this formula, and he also was a suburban dad who would bring home the comics and give them to the kids in the neighborhood and say, hey, what do you like? What do you want to see?
Right.
And as ridiculous as that stuff was, he knew that every 6 months he had to come up with some new little piece of the mythos just to keep it interesting. It didn't have to make sense because, essentially the stories were mainly, Superman tricking Lois into not thinking he's Clark Kent.
Right.
This is what a 10-year-old would do with superpowers if he had them. He would play tricks on his mom and his sister.
Yeah, it's very, very true. I remember a lot of those stories where, like, Superman would do something with like his power of super ventriloquism, or he had a Superman a Clark Kent robot or a Superman robot, and
I was writing the intro to this thing. Superman Golden Age Omnibus, Volume 6, and it's stories in the mid-late 40s, and he's like popping up with superpowers all over them. It's like,
yes,
you could change your face. Wait,
right, yes,
whatever it was. It was kind of like whatever you need. He was Superman. He could do whatever you needed.
That's right, and they really didn't rely too heavily on continuity back then at all. At all.
The only thing that was the same was, Clark, Lois, Jimmy, Perry White, Daily Planet. Everything else is up for. There's another one of those stories. It starts with Clark and Lois going to pick up the Daily Planet's payroll at the bank. What the hell? Is this what star reporters do? They go pick up the payroll at the bank because the Daily Planet pays in cash. I don't understand. But it was just whatever was necessary.
Right, of course. Yes, I mean, there was just something about those stories that were just so lighthearted, and you could just read it and escape. You could.
What do we want to do? We want to escape.
We want to escape. Yes, and that's really what they did. Now, Paul, I wanted to ask you. Now, a lot of people, we remember it because we're from that era. But I remember. I forget what year it was. Maybe it was like 78 when DC was doing their DC Explosion, which then became the DC Implosion. And you were there in the offices when that happened. What was that like as an insider?
I was pretty stunning. It was.
And maybe you could just sort of give a brief explanation of that.
Well, there was after what had sales had started to show some improvement, and there were changes in the distribution and who was all kinds of stuff. The direct market was coming in, but there was this big expansion planned by DC,
right?
Essentially, as a move to knock Marvel titles off the racks,
right?
And I think it was something like 17 or 18 titles were added to the schedule, and I think it was February of that year. It was one of the worst winters in memory.
Yes.
Ice storms and roads were closed. And as a result, for pretty much the entire month of February, comic book magazine distribution came to a halt.
Right.
And it just wiped out DC because they were just expanding.
Right.
And, all of a sudden, yikes. So they slashed a bunch of the titles, and some of the staff, including myself. I was assistant PR guy at the time. But we were kind of watching everybody scrambling around, and I was as low in the totem pole as you could get. So I was kind of looking up and watching all of this, and there were a lot of very nervous people. And since the early '70s, I was hanging around and hearing all these guys who came in, the artists, Chaikin and Simonson and Kaluta, and they'd sit around in the coffee room at DC and talk about how they're going to do this for a few years because the comics industry is dying. So come 1978 and the implosion, the advertising for the expansion of titles was the DC explosion. The ironic commentary of the failure was the DC implosion.
Yes, I remember that.
So it was just very surprising and very and kind of sudden, and was my first experience with unemployment.
So what happened for you to get back to DC Comics from that point?
Well, I continued writing for them.
Okay, so you were writing freelance.
Yeah. And that just picked up as I got a little better, and also there was more of a changeover of the editorial thing. The old school was retiring or consolidating their little fields, and there were a lot of younger editors and coming in, and so it was a lot easier for me to go up to Larry Hama or Al Milgram and get a job than it was to go up to Murray Boltinoff, who didn't want to know me because I was just another one of these kids. Murray wouldn't buy anybody's first story. Refused to buy anybody's first story. He accidentally, thinking that Jerry Conway had already sold to another editor, bought Jerry's first story. And when he found out it was Jerry's first sale, he didn't run it. It didn't go until years later when Paul Levitz took over the title. But that was just, so, it was easier to start working with these guys. And we spoke more of the same language. Really the old, one of the old school editors that I did get along with. I did not get along with these guys. I liked them and respected them and all that. We just never worked together because they had their people. But Julie Schwartz, who was my hero, editorial hero growing up, because he did all the comic books that I loved.
Right.
He did The Flash, and he did Justice League, and he did Atom and Green Lantern, and not necessarily that I loved them, but they were the best.
Yes.
They were the quality books at DC. I loved Superman more than I liked the Atom. The Atom was certainly a better comic book.
Yeah, the Atom had such great concepts, like the little time thing that he would go in. The time pool, yes, the time pool. Yes, I mean, the Atom had such. The one thing about Julie was he had such great scientific concepts.
Yeah.
In his stories, like in the Flash and the Atom, and sort of made I think it went a long way to getting kids sort of interested in that kind of stuff too.
His comics also, he regularly featured these science fact pages.
Yes.
Flash facts and lightning facts and things like that. He was interested in that stuff. He had this collection of science books from the 30s and 1930s and 40s that he kept on his windowsill. And if he was looking for ideas, he'd pick up a book and start flipping through it and go, hydrogen in the air. Okay, there's and that's the way he operated.
Well, they were all so great. They really were. Actually, Paul, we've come to that part of the show where we need to just take a very short break. So if you don't mind sticking around, we're going to just take a very quick break, and then we will be right back with more of Mr. Paul Kupperberg right after these words. Yes, wet your whistle while you can. Hello, we're back with me, Tony Homeperm, and Talking Tony, with my very special guest, Mr. Paul Kupperberg. One of my idols, really. Growing up reading comic books, Paul, I always saw your name in the credits, either as a writer or as an editor. And we spoke about your your writing for DC Comics. Eventually, you went on to become an editor, and you edited so many great titles. I specifically remember your run on Wonder Woman, which I thought was, when you were editing and John Byrne was writing and drawing it. I loved that series of Wonder Woman. I just thought it was terrific.
Thank you. Yeah, John did well. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't do anything. I called John. I said, "Hey, you want to do one?" I actually called him to write Wonder Woman, and he said, "Yeah, if I'm going to write it, I might as well draw it." And I said, "No, you can't do that. I don't need that kind of level of art. I need, So, and one of my number one editorial theory is hire the really best person you can for the job and stay out of their way." John Byrne doesn't need me to tell him how to write, and draw Wonder Woman. I think he'll figure it out. I mean, of course we talked. It's not like, walks away and operates in a vacuum. But, he's got I hired him for his take on Wonder Woman. So let him, let him do it. I had a lot of fun with that. Before that, we had the run with William Messner Loebs and Mike Deodato.
Yes, I remember that one. Yes.
And that was, kind of the pivotal run for Wonder Woman at that time, because the previous direction had kind of, dragged her through the sewer. They had her working in a taco stand.
Oh God, I remember that. I know.
I developed the Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne rule. You won't do it to Clark or Bruce. You don't do it to Wonder Woman.
You don't do it to Wonder Woman. An interesting fact, when you were editing and John was writing and drawing the book, one of the storylines was that Wonder Woman, who is, as an Amazon, is Princess Diana.
Yeah.
She was killed, and it just so happened to coincide at the very same moment in time in the real world. Princess Diana was killed.
Yes, that was on the. I think that came out, Wednesday, and the next week.
Yes,
she died, and I was actually yelled at for that. I was asked, quote, "How could you let that happen?"
Well, you're an editor. Obviously, you control, the universe, right?
I wanted her dead, and that was it. I mean, the woman. I was enough of her.
Oh my.
Yes, it happens.
Right.
It's a big world, and odds of anything happening are 50-50. Either it will happen or
Very, very true. Very true. As an editor, what were some of the what were what were some of the projects that you worked on as an editor that were the most fun?
Um, well, paradoxically, one of the most fun was also the one that almost killed me.
Well, of course.
It was the life story of the Flash graphic novel,
Uh-huh.
written by Brian Augustyn and Mark Waid,
Hmm.
and it was the biography of the Flash, written by Iris West,
Hmm.
and Gil Kane was the artist.
Hmm.
And I love Gil Kane's art.
Ah,
Gil, you know,
yes, a
one of
legend.
one
Another
of
legend.
the greats of the business, you know, just uh, but we were given a too short deadline to begin with,
Ah,
and Gil got sick. Gil was sick. He had a relapse of his cancer while he
right.
was working on this,
Mm.
and as a result, he was either not delivering or delivering the wrong thing.
Oh,
But he didn't tell me he was sick.
oh,
He was just like he thought if he told me he was sick, I would fire him. Instead, he didn't tell me he was sick, and I had to fire him because he was screwing up, and wound up doing what I would have done in the first place, which was hire another artist to help him. So, you know, I got Joe Staten to finish it.
mhm.
Joe had been an assistant to Gil in the past, so I thought, you know, that matches up. And besides that, Joe Staten is one of the most reliable artists who have ever breathed. He's an amazing and trustworthy young man. I recommend him. And the whole thing was
I was always a huge Joe Staten fan. I remember, like, you know, so many of the books that he drew, and another one of those artists that such a distinctive style. You always knew when
yeah.
he was the artist.
You know, Joe has gone through a lot of different phases. You know, he had that early Charlton E-Man.
Yes, loved E-Man.
Yeah, great strip. And then there was that you know, phase there at DC where he was a major superhero artist. He was the regular assigned artist on Action Comics for a while.
Right.
You know, that's like major. You know, so I've worked with Joe since the new Doom Patrol in '77, and no matter where I have worked, I've always managed to work with Joe. You know, I always managed to find to find something. Not that he needs, you know, the jobs I throw him, but I always know he's talented and I can count on him.
Yes, definitely. I also wanted to talk to you. Moving past DC Comics, your
But it's not easy.
but your work as a writer on it was the Life with Archie series
Yes.
for Archie Comics, which was you know, I kind of think that sort of kind of inspired, like, how they have like that Riverdale series now on.
Kind of.
No, you don't think
No,
that's.
I don't think it kind of.
You definitely do.
I
Definitely.
I think everything they've done,
Without a doubt.
you know, since and in fact, the publisher, you know, Jonathan Goldwater has said to me, you know, what we accomplished with Life with Archie and showing this different, more serious side of the character was what led to all the different takeoffs and incarnations of the character since. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. And
I go to bullshit. Credit where it's due. Yeah,
credit where it's due.
but also in the spirit of credit where it is due, the idea of the married life, Archie marries Betty and Archie marries Veronica, was Michael Uslan's.
Yes.
He did
Yes.
the original miniseries in Archie Comics that kicked it off. And when they decided to spin it off into an ongoing series, Michael wrote the first issue, but he didn't have time to write the monthly, I guess, something about publishing, producing blockbuster billion-dollar Batman movies or something. You know, he and Victor Gorlick somehow came up with me to write the series, to take it over. So it's definitely, it was definitely Michael's brainchild. But
Yes,
the
yes.
subsequent, 3 or 4 years was me.
Yes, yes, and it was such a great series. I followed that religiously, and especially one of the characters in there, Kevin Keller, who was like the first gay character in the Archie series. It was that was really such a breakthrough character.
Yeah, Dan Parent created him,
Yes, yes.
we brought him into the Life with Archie
Hmm.
series, and he was, he's a great character. I mean, there's so
Yes.
I got three major storylines out of him. You need when you're a soap opera.
Yes.
But it was. It's one of those things. It's one of those things I'm most proud of in my having written.
And I have to mention that you actually wrote a Kevin young adult novel.
Yes.
And you won the 2014 Scribe Award from the International Association of Media Tie-in Winners for that.
Right. Yes.
And on behalf of the LGBTQ community, Paul, I want to say thank you.
You're very welcome
for doing that.
I'm happy to have been able to do my little part. We also got nominated for a GLAAD award, GLAAD Media Award.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm proud of that work. It's writing superheroes is a lot of fun and all that. But certainly back when I was doing most of my superhero writing in the 70s and 80s, it's removed from reality.
Yes.
It wasn't until I started writing Vigilante, where I was writing about this street level guy dealing with things from child abuse to rape and drugs and all kinds of horrific real life things. That's a lot more satisfying to write. That there's no surprise device you can pull out of your hat to ward off the villain.
Right.
You don't suddenly develop a superpower to fight off the bad guy.
No.
This is real life. And so I find those characters, certainly after, the probably, 800 or 900 superhero stories I've written, to be a lot more satisfying. I'd rather write about people in street clothes dealing with real things than guys flying. I think there's more to say there.
Absolutely. Although it seems, even in today's superhero comic books, they're really just soap operas with superpowers. It seems to me.
Sure, and that's okay. I mean,
of course.
But like the TV shows, the CW shows.
Yes, the CW shows. Yes.
They're also everything's so easy. Something goes wrong. Well, on the Flash, Cisco will whip up a gizmo.
That's right.
Or everybody's suddenly a scientific whiz.
Right.
Or there's a serum that will. No, sorry. I know Superman is not going to stay dead.
No.
Vigilante, he stayed dead.
He stayed dead. Yes.
Adrian Chase, he committed suicide.
Right.
In realization of the horror he had become, and ended his own life. And it's not a decision that we made creatively or brought up abruptly in the story. We built it up for over a year, whether you knew what was what was happening or not. So it's you can't really do that with superheroes, because no matter how much you build it up, Green Lantern's not really dead.
Nope. He came back first as a ghost, then as real. So
yeah.
But also, Paul, along with the comic books, you've edited and written magazines. You've written, as I said before, you've written novels. There was one novel that the title of it just speaks to my soul. Jiu-Jitsu, the Hebrew Hands of Fury.
Thank you. That's not a novel, actually. That's an instruction manual.
Oh, it's an instruction manual.
Yes, it teaches you the ancient, the Hebrew Hands of Fury, the art of Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
It's actually a stretch goal reward on my current Kickstarter thing.
Mm-hmm.
Has about 10 and a half hours to go.
Yes, that's right.
But there's a digital downloadable version of that coming. Yeah, it was just something I wrote for Kensington Books that spun out of an article from the Weekly World News, where I had been an editor and writer.
Right,
and,
right.
It's just a step-by-step instruction manual with photos
Uh-huh.
of a lot of Hasids in doing karate and jiu-jitsu. So Jews doing things, doing ordinary things is always funny.
Of course, of course. So, speaking of your Kickstarter, Paul, now that is for this is a novel, correct? Well, it's a book.
No, this is for a book of a collection of essays and columns about writing and creating and all that. It's called I Never Write for the Money, but I always turn in the manuscript for a check.
Of course. And what can you tell us about that?
Well, again, it's pieces I've written over the years about writing comics, about and the subtitle is about writing and its on writing and its aftermath. There's what do you think about what you've done? How the public sees you? What does the public think of you? How do artists look at what they do? And how the industry has changed, publishing and comic books over the last decade. There's been such a sea change. Nothing today is like it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not doing this, shouting at the clouds, old man on the lawn thing, although I do a pretty good one. It's true. It's just, a matter of fact. And things are changing even more dramatically now. Change is exponential. It happens faster and faster.
So true.
So the publishing industry, I mean, I have found sales figures on comics I wrote, my royalty statements from the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, some middle level book I'm doing is 147,000 copies. Mm-hmm. Well, that would be, the bestseller.
Yeah.
This now, so where's that market, and how do you compensate? How do you keep going when you've got, a third, a fifth of what the market used to be, and then you get into the whole, realm of self-publishing, that hell. So it's a change. So these are just a lot of my thoughts, and frankly, I'm overwhelmed and humbled at the number of people who are willing to put up money to actually read what I have to say. So.
Yeah, I'm actually, when we're through with this, I'm going to be contributing to your Kickstarter tonight before it ends. I definitely want to be a part of that. I have to say, like I said earlier, like being a drag queen for me was sort of a way to like be, like a superhero. And, sort of indirectly, you're kind of responsible for a little bit of the creation of Toni Holmperm, because I grew up reading, so many things that you wrote, and, it kind of just, it's just part of that, that whole mitzigash that makes me up.
No, I get you, and I appreciate that. And I actually, I was fortunate enough to hear pretty early on an example. Somebody, it was a silly back. Oh, see, I'm doing it now. It was a backup in Adventure Comics, an Aqualad backup. Mm-hmm. About his learning his secret, his origin, where he comes from this land of people with purple eyes.
With purple eyes, I remember that. Yes.
and finally learns that he is who he is, no matter where he is and where he
Right.
comes from. And not too long after that was published, I met a fan who told me what that story had meant to them, how she had read it at a low time in her life, and she credited it. I'm going to be humble, and I'm sure it's a lot of hyperbole, but she credited it with saving her life, with giving her, making her stop and think. And so, even when you're tossing out this silly little, secret origin of Aqualad, you might be touching somebody somehow.
Absolutely.
No. So I've never taken that, for granted, because, it happened to me too. I mean, again, my comic books, I said it early on, comic books saved my life. They gave me a refuge. They gave me a place to hide away where I could create my own worlds. I sat in the corner. My superpower as a kid was invisibility.
Oh.
I learned how to find a corner and just sit there, and people didn't notice me, which was good, because if they're not noticing you, they're not bothering you.
Yes.
Hurting you. So,
Very
but
true.
I would write and I would draw and I would read my comic books and my, and science fiction and fantasy and all the stuff that my brain is filled with. And, these guys, Robert E. Howard saved my life. Julie Schwartz saved my life. Mort Weisinger saved my life. If it hadn't been for these guys giving me their imagination, I don't know what I would have done. Hopefully I would have found something, but geez.
Well, I'm very grateful that you found the comic book world, because it really meant so much to me. Paul, what are you aside from the I Never Write for the Money, what are you currently working on?
I've got another book I'm trying to get. I have to do some legal stuff to try to get some rights and things and all that, and I'm hoping to be able to publish that. And a few other things. I'm associated with Crazy 8 Press, which is a publishing hub consisting of myself and Peter David and Bob Greenberger and Michael Jan Friedman and all 8 of us essentially. And we're crazy, hence the name. So, but
that's what is it? The
Crazy 8 Press.
The Crazy 8 Press.
Yes. .com. And we all publish our books through there, and so I do. I write for the anthologies that we publish, and I've got a few other projects in the works that I'm hoping to put out through them. I recently finished a very weird screenplay for a client. First time I ever wrote a screenplay, but you live and learn.
Yeah. Well, you've written, you've really written in like every media, so why not?
I mean, yes, I've written Mad Libs. I've reached the summit,
You even wrote the world's greatest superhero newspaper strip, which was drawn by Jose Delbo, who was one of my teachers at the Kupperberg school.
Hello, my name is Jose.
Yeah, I would show him my artwork, and he would go, "Very sketchy, very sketchy."
I did a lot of stuff with Jose over the years, and
he was such a great man.
I loved his work, and I loved him. He's still here. I just saw him. What the hell am I talking about? Just saw him last year at a convention in Connecticut. No, he's great. He's a sweetheart and so talented. And when these guys, you look at their stuff and it's deceptively simple.
Yes.
But when you've written the script and you see what they take, what you've given them and how they've interpreted it and made it into, this flowing story, man, you don't even know what these guys are doing. You just fans look at a lot of fans just look at the line, and they don't look at what's being done. So
Yeah, as an artist, Jose had such a great grasp of the fundamentals of anatomy and perspective and things like that. And I think he got overshadowed by a lot of guys that were very flash in the pan.
Yeah.
That, if you actually analyzed, things like, the body parts couldn't actually work, or move in the way they were drawing it. There were extra muscles that, didn't exist, and, perspective is crazy.
Not a 26 pack, it's
yes. Also, he drew he drew great horses.
Yes.
Jose drew great horse. I couldn't draw a horse to save my life.
Well, most people can't. Joe Staten and I have a joke that's been ongoing since 1977 when I asked him to draw a winged horse in Doom Patrol, and Joe can't draw horses for shit.
Oh, geez.
And now when I call him and say, "Hey, Joe, I got this thing," he goes, "Any horses?"
Any horses?
And if there's horses, no joke. But no, Jose, I asked him to do an illustration for a short story I wrote for the Cheyenne Kid, which was a Charlton character that he drew back in the 60s and 70s. And, he did me this beautiful pinup of Cheyenne Kid riding straight at you on a horse. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, he was an amazing artist. I wish I could have learned more from him. I really do. Maybe I would have become a comic book artist. But I'm not doing too bad. I'm still a superhero in my own right.
Your own right. That's it.
Oh, well, Paul, I can't believe it, but we're almost at the end of our hour. But I know it goes so quickly, and believe me, I could ask you a million more questions, but I know you can't miss Jeopardy tonight.
I can't miss Jeopardy.
You can't miss Jeopardy.
How much time does Alex have left?
Oh, no. But Paul, please tell people where they can find you, and especially where they can find your Kickstarter, because that's going to be ending at 10 tonight.
Oh, it's going to be ending at 5 tomorrow morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's got 10 hours to go.
Yeah, 10 hours to go. Yes.
10 hours to go.
The Kickstarter is, I guess you just go to Kickstarter and, search for I Never Write for the Money or Paul Kupperberg, and you'll come up with that. As for me personally, I am on Facebook and Twitter. And I also have a website, paulkupperberg.com. And also as well, crazy8press.com and Charlton Neo Comics, which is, Google it.
Google it.
Google it. But yeah, there's published a whole bunch of comics in recent years with my friends Mortad and Roger McKenzie, and working again with people like Joe Staten and many others who have been kind enough to contribute. So
that's great. That's great. Well, Paul, I want to thank you again so much for doing this with me. This has been a dream come true for me to have you on the show, and thank you for indulging me in my little bit of craziness tonight. giving you my best impression of the daring new adventures of Supergirl. If she were
she went a little lighter on the eyeliner, but other than
just
that,
a little. Just a little, but I had to give it my all for you.
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this with me tonight, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And I will be back in 2 weeks' time with a very special guest, Nathaniel Wayne, also known as Council of Geeks, from YouTube. So until then, stay safe, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Twilly-dilly-dee, 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 tweet, tweet, tweet. tweet.
She talks to the people all night long, chatting and a gabbing and a singing her song. All the divas down on Rainbow Street love to hear Toni go tweet, tweet, tweet. Talking Toni,
Tweet, tweet,
talk, talking Toni.
tweet, tweet.
Oh, talking Toni gonna really gonna talk tonight.